You know, I feel like when it comes to Assassin's Creed spin-off games, the weirder the subtitle, well, more of a spin-off it is. Or maybe it's the other way around. There is so much from the Assassin's Creed franchise that so many of us don't even know about. There's obscure games, books, mangas, and all types of other weird projects like short films that Assassin's Creed has just popped up in over the years. Okay, so 2008 and 2009 were actually wild years if you were a fan of the Assassin's Creed series, I guess. Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles for the Nintendo DS. For a while, this was the earliest game in the Assassin's Creed timeline, as this was a prequel spin-off to the main Assassin's Creed game, and this game was interesting. You play from the third-person perspective, and I mean, that's kind of cool, especially for a DS game. Seeing this all rendered in, DS quality 3D is interesting, but the game of course doesn't have like an open world, which was one of the big things Assassin's Creed was famous for, but it does have like action hack and slash stuff, and I guess this could count as stealth and maybe some parkour as well. I mean, for a DS game, for what it is, it's probably not the worst thing that we have ever seen for like a weird spin-off. They did some cool things with some platforming and other ways to at least get the feeling of an Assassin's Creed game here. I do have to say though, the sound on the DS just doesn't work with the sound that they were trying to put in this game. And it's weird because there are other DS games that have excellent soundtracks, but Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles is definitely not one of them. I mean, just listen to this. Now, a couple of years later, this game would get a port, surprisingly enough, onto iOS, Android, and a ton of other mobile devices that were around in 2010, I guess. And this version's interesting. I will say the resolution does look a lot better, and the sound mostly sounds a little bit better most of the time. There's this one part where some guards are sleeping, and it sounds absolutely atrocious. Okay, so at this point in the Assassin's Creed timeline, the first Assassin's Creed game came out, this little DS game came out, but then PlayStation Portable wasn't forgotten about either. They had a full-on action-adventure game called Assassin's Creed Bloodlines that was released exclusively for the PSP. This is technically a direct sequel this time to the first Assassin's Creed game, which, kind of an interesting choice. And listen, this wasn't just like a little release. This game was a big deal. Assassin's Creed 2 came out in November 2009, and Bloodlines was coming out in 2009 also for the PSP. And then on top of that, there was another DS Assassin's Creed called Assassin's Creed 2 Discovery, which we'll talk about in a second. But for Assassin's Creed Bloodlines, releasing in 2009, this is pretty late in the PlayStation Portable's life. And I gotta say, they squeezed out a pretty solid looking game by portable device standards at this point. And you know what? I'm kind of impressed. This game actually implemented a full-on open world environment, which, we didn't see that with the DS version released a year before. And for the most part, this game tries to emulate the gameplay style from the actual first Assassin's Creed game. Sure, there are a lot of limitations. There aren't as many civilians out. The city kind of feels a little bare at times. But once again, this was Assassin's Creed on a PlayStation Portable in 2009. I have to say, I was kind of surprised that when this game released, reviewers were almost more harsh on this version of the game than the DS version of the game. But maybe it was just because it was released alongside, two other Assassin's Creed games simultaneously, one of them being Assassin's Creed 2, which is often touted as one of the best games in the series. But yeah, I don't know, this one was kind of special. I don't know why it was maybe panned as much. I mean, it's not the most amazing game ever, but I think that it was kind of an argument for why Assassin's Creed games should and could work on handheld devices. Okay, then that third release, Assassin's Creed 2 Discovery for Nintendo DS, also released in November 2009, and this game was developed by a studio known as Griptonite Games, which would later become Glue. That huge company that purchased GameSpy and then made them shut down all the servers for those multiplayer games. They're the people who made this Assassin's Creed game, and oh boy. So this one's interesting. It takes place during Assassin's Creed 2, between sequences 12 and 13, taking place sometime between like 1941 and 1942. But this time around, we get to play as Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, except on the Nintendo DS. What possibly could go wrong here? So let's see here. This game is a 2.5D, most mostly side-scrolling game this time around. It doesn't have like the regular 3D effect that the first DS Assassin's Creed game had. So they were trying something different. Maybe they were just embracing what kind of worked in the other Assassin's Creed game, but tried to streamline some things, I guess. I don't know. For the most part, you move linearly from one level to another, and then the levels are just divided into 3 different categories. There's like the normal levels where you can take your time, you can explore, find collectibles. Then there's like a chase level where you have to like avoid combat and find the fastest route. It's like more parkour speed heavy. And then there's like some stealth levels, which I guess stealth is a mechanic in this game they considered. But be careful, if you get spotted too many times when you're supposed to be stealthy, you're done. You gotta start this whole little section over again. Okay, we have some more really interesting things we're going to talk about in just a second, but first, this video is sponsored by Rocket Money. Don't go anywhere, this actually could be really helpful for you. I've been checking my subscriptions on my phone, and I've been completely surprised with like how much I've been spending on random video game subscriptions that I don't use. Like one of them's charging me $10 a month for a system I don't even have. Well, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. Right now, I've been using Rocket Money to cancel all of these unwanted subscriptions that I've been paying for, and they make it super easy. You can cancel stuff in just a couple of taps. And I'm also using Rocket Money to set some budgets for myself so I can easily see how much I'm spending every month and where and what my spending habits are going to. Rocket Money has helped save its customers an average of $720 a year with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. So if you want to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/rocketsloth or click on the link in the description to get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/rocketsloth to get started for free. Okay, let's get back to Assassin's Creed and these weird titles. Assassin's Creed Identity. This one was interesting. It released for iOS and Android all the way back in the prehistoric time of 2016. This game was actually developed by Ubisoft Blue Byte. They're a German development studio owned by Ubisoft, who work mostly as a support studio for main AAA releases. But yeah, they were thrown this Assassin's Creed game, and you know what? From a technical standpoint, kind of impressive to see in an Assassin's Creed game that very much lives up to the genre that has been created over the past Assassin's Creed games, but on a mobile device. The gameplay takes players to several different locations and time periods, taking place during the Italian Renaissance in the 16th century, but it also takes some locations directly from Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. And this game, while being rather short, still managed to be a pretty good showcase as to how far games on mobile devices had already come in such a short amount of time. It's a technical marvel, but as for an Assassin's Creed game itself, it's pretty mid. I mean, all of the basics you would expect to experience in an Assassin's Creed game are here, and even if the controls feel a little bit slippery at times, this game mostly captures the charm that was really popular in the older Assassin's Creed games. I think the biggest takeaway, or the reason that this game maybe didn't do as well, like its Metacritic reviews are pretty mid-tier, was mostly because of criticism that gameplay-wise or story-wise, it's not that deep. Like once you played the game for a short bit, you've pretty much already experienced everything that the game is going to offer gameplay and story-wise, and it really comes down to whether or not the player is invested in the story enough to push through the repetitive gameplay, or if they'll fall off. I think this is probably a bigger criticism for a game like Assassin's Creed, where there's so many releases and constantly the Assassin's Creed series tries to push itself to separate each title from the previous titles. And if anything, this game, in an attempt to showcase the power of mobile device game development, maybe played it too safe to the original Assassin's Creed type concepts already established, and I think this one just didn't quite stand out enough. This game ended up shutting down in October 2021, and it was removed from the storefronts just 2 months later. Also, around this time, Assassin's Creed was getting really popular, so Ubisoft decided to go really hard with Assassin's Creed releases. They would make an Assassin's Creed mainline game for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, but also have another smaller game for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 users on the older generation hardware, and then the older generation hardware game would later be released in next-gen hardware so that even the newer console holders could also buy that game. Okay, then, a year later, Assassin's Creed Chronicles released, and this isn't to be confused with Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles, which we already talked about. This is something altogether different. In a way, it's almost this weird backpedaling, but I can kind of see what they were trying to do here. Assassin's Creed Chronicles is interesting. Most people remember Assassin's Creed Chronicles China, but the other two Assassin's Creed Chronicle games that came out later seem to often be overlooked or forgotten about. But for this video, we'll talk about all three of them. This game brought Assassin's Creed back to the 2.5D side-scrolling type platforming game, kind of like what we saw in some of those handheld games earlier, but these games are a little bit different because they're heavily inspired by like the art style of each time period represented here. Now, the first Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Chronicles China, puts players in 16th century Imperial China during the Ming Dynasty. There's actually quite a bit happening in this short side-scrolling adventure. Like at one point, you're at the Great Wall of China defending it against the Mongol invasion. Kind of an interesting concept. Obviously, it is a step away from the traditional Assassin's Creed games, like what we saw with the last mobile game, but this game was different. It actually wasn't a mobile release. This was a full-on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 release, and this first chapter released as like a DLC as a part of the Assassin's Creed Unity Season Pass. Now, some of you might remember when Assassin's Creed Unity released, oh boy, that game was in some rough shape with like just the polish across the board. It was an ambitious title, but man, it needed another year or two to really cook before the game would have been ready. Also, around this time, Assassin's Creed was getting really popular, so Ubisoft decided to go really hard with Assassin's Creed releases. They would make an Assassin's Creed mainline game for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, but also have another smaller game for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 users on the older generation hardware, and then the older generation hardware game would later be released in next-gen hardware so that even the newer console holders could also buy that game. So I think there already was some wear and tear on the Assassin's Creed brand at this point. I mean, the studio going yearly with the titles, and then a game like Unity not being polished already was a weird look. So then a side-scrolling game releasing on the main consoles was just very different. But what was Assassin's Creed Chronicles China was probably the best of what would become of this little mini-series. 9 months later, though, the Assassin's Creed Chronicles game series would technically become a series now, as the release of Assassin's Creed Chronicles India would turn this into a little duology for a second. This game would take place in 19th century India, visiting the events of the Anglo-Sikh Wars. And this game was similarly received to Assassin's Creed Chronicles China. There was some more criticism, though, maybe a little bit, that the fact that some of the issues from Assassin's Creed Chronicles China weren't resolved by the time that this one released, like some of the combat being a little bit clunky, and sometimes the AI would just be kind of weird on how it moved around. This would sometimes lead to some instances of trial and error, but I think fans are starting to notice something bigger about these little Chronicle games that we'll get to in just a second. But 1 month after Assassin's Creed Chronicles India released, Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia released. And at the same time as the Russia release, they then bundled the three games to be sold as like a little bundle trilogy you could buy on the store. Now, of course, Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia was still a short game that was heavily artistically inspired, this time taking place during the aftermath of the October Revolution that happened in 1917. And while I think that maybe premise-wise, this one had the most potential, this one was probably bombed the most by reviewers. Not only were there a lot of the same issues in the first two Chronicle games, but also the fatigue of Assassin's Creed releases was really setting in. This was just 1 month after Assassin's Creed Chronicles India released that Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia was releasing. This game quickly garnered the reputation of being possibly the most rushed of the three games, and also just kind of a copy and paste of the other two games. A lot of the reviews kind of point out that the game has no real differences from its predecessors other than the story and setting, and apparently it can get frustrating and starts to get boring after a while. Of the lesser talked about Assassin's Creed games, I feel like this one specifically gets talked about the least out of them. But like I said before, these Assassin's Creed Chronicle games were doing way more than just existing for the sake of being filler Assassin's Creed content. There were some big strings that were connecting this universe together, and also maybe some connections elsewhere. One of the big things that made the Assassin's Creed Chronicle games appealing to a lot of the die-hard Assassin's Creed fans who were more than just interested in anything Assassin's Creed was the fact that these games, for the first time in a long time, felt like a pretty big callback to the famous Prince of Persia games. Now, those games, as many of you know, were not only really popular in the early 2000s, but led to the foundations that ended up becoming Assassin's Creed itself. Matter of fact, Assassin's Creed was born out of essentially what was a canceled Prince of Persia game. There was a title that was announced and showcased with a full trailer and everything called Prince of Persia Assassins. And this idea for a game would grow from its original concept, essentially being a mainline Prince of Persia game, into a brand new IP in the form of Assassin's Creed. The team who originally worked on Prince of Persia Sands of Time actually worked on a prototype for this game and had made a whole pitch deck and showed it off to Ubisoft, which I think is what we actually see circulating online as that trailer we mentioned earlier. And there was some decent concept art released for this as well, but ultimately Ubisoft decided to reject the pitch as they felt like the game didn't focus enough on Prince of Persia itself, but focused more on this like little side thing, following characters unrelated to the Prince of Persia lore and universe. So the team continued to work on this prototype, but essentially it moved on to what would become the Assassin's Creed franchise that we know today. And of course, when Assassin's Creed became so hugely popular when the first game came out and the follow-up titles, Prince of Persia became less and less a priority for Ubisoft and kind of slowly eventually turned into this forgotten game series almost. Now, hardcore fans though noticed that, of course, these Assassin's Creed Chronicle trilogy of games does kind of seem very reminiscent to those good old glory days when Prince of Persia games would still release. So there was at least that working for these Chronicle games. But if you think the impacts of the Assassin's Creed Chronicle games just stop there, oh no, you would be surprised, because the Assassin's Creed Chronicle games were also setting up more things in the larger Assassin's Creed universe. It doesn't just stop at these little spin-off games. They already had their roots planted in a ton of other forms of media as well, directly connecting Assassin's Creed Chronicles to other things. Like, for instance, Assassin's Creed Chronicles China follows a female assassin known as Shao Jun, was a secondary character in a film project known as Assassin's Creed Embers. So years earlier, in 2011, Assassin's Creed released a film, and not the main movie theatrical release film, a smaller little like short film that was animated and served as the conclusion to Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood and Revelations, in essentially what would become this character's main final act, wrapping up his overall story, even though his character and lore would live on in other forms later on. I mean, this one is a little bit tragic, possibly, but in this film, of course, the character Shao Jun is introduced here. And then, of course, to tie everything together, they chose to make this character the protagonist for Assassin's Creed Chronicles China. So anyone who was really invested in this short video movie, who remembered who this character was back in 2011, I guess would be hyped to see the character in their own little standalone side-scrolling game. So that's neat. Then, of course, Assassin's Creed Chronicles India also tied things back, but this time to a special graphic novel that Ubisoft released in 2013 titled Assassin's Creed Brahmin. This game followed a character known as Arbaz Mir, who's fighting off the influence of the East India Company in the 19th century, of course facing off with the Templar Order once again, and of course this is the character that they chose to use in Assassin's Creed Chronicles India, bringing this character to the video game side of things. Then, a little bit earlier in the Assassin's Creed timeline, I guess, we can look back to 2010, 2011, and there was like this comic book released. This one was a little bit interesting. It follows this character, Nikolai Orlev, but also like cuts back to his great grandson in the whole like Assassin's Creed real universe timeline thing. And honestly, from what I can see here, this story actually seemed pretty cool for just like doing something outside of the traditional Assassin's Creed stories, especially in the earlier years of 2010, 2011, when Assassin's Creed was still smaller-ish. In Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia, we see Nikolai once again. So the comic book kind of ties all together to this one, but of course, since Chronicles Russia was the last one of this little like trilogy of things, they also wanted to tie it over to the bigger story. So they had this whole like precursor box storyline that connects things to the characters and events from the previous two stories. And it's just, you know, Assassin's Creed just trying to tie things and making its lore a whole lot deeper and maybe more confusing to try to understand from the outside looking in. I mean, I do think ultimately it is kind of cool whenever like the games acknowledge something that happens in the larger expanded universe. It's not something you always see in video games because they know there's like a detachment between the people who play the games and interact with the outside media. But still, it is cool when like one of those characters from the outside gets to traverse their way into the inside, even if it is just for some little spin-off game called Assassin's Creed Chronicles. Now, I'll be honest, I always knew Assassin's Creed had books and they had a larger universe being painted beyond just the main games. I mean, there was even a movie that released adapting the huge lore that Assassin's Creed had. Whether the movie was good or not is a different story, but at least there was a movie made, which shows that someone at some point thought Assassin's Creed could work in a movie format. Okay, honestly, I didn't want to sit down and watch the Assassin's Creed movie, so I delegated this work over to Luke to do, so Luke could watch the Assassin's Creed movie and tell us what he thought of it. I didn't want to watch this movie.
Well, the Assassin's Creed movie was kind of rough. It is very slow and very boring and very long for what it is. It's almost 2 hours long, and it feels like the whole story could have been told in 30 if they picked up the pace a little bit. But then at the same time, it also felt like they didn't really know what they were going, because it felt like they kept trying to introduce new things and then never really finish off those things, but already came up with the next thing. And actually, video game movies are tough to make. And I mean, there's only like a handful I would consider even good movies. And often if you look at the reviewer scores for these video game movies, they're pretty low. And I mean, Assassin's Creed lands at like an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes and like a 36 on Metacritic. So that's very low. Now you could argue of that obviously the reviewers don't know the video games and so they give it a low score. But if you look at the audience scores on any of these platforms, you'll also notice it's much lower than other video game movies. Like Warcraft, for example, which is, I think, my favorite video game movie, has a low reviewer score on Rotten Tomato at like 29%, but the audience score is at 76%, so the audience actually enjoyed it. But the same can't be said for Assassin's Creed fans and the movie. It didn't really seem like the hardcore fans were also very pleased with this one. And even Michael Fassbender, who plays the main character in the movie, actually wasn't too fond of the movie himself. In an interview, he said, "I would make it more entertaining. That's really the main note. The feeling of the film, I think, took itself too seriously, and I would get to the action a lot quicker. I think there's 3 beginnings of the film, which is a mistake." And on top of all of that, this movie kind of was a box office failure. On a $125 million budget, this movie only made $240 million worldwide, which probably means they did not make any money off this movie, because a rule of thumb is, with marketing and everything, it has to be like 2.5 times the budget for it to be worth. So they're short like another 70 million before they would, see any profits. Also, this movie is set in the 15th century in Spain, which I at least think time frame wise, it kind of is set around the same times that Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Assassin's Creed Revelations are set. But I do think this movie is canon within the Assassin's Creed lore, so it has to fit in somewhere around there. And then a couple years before this movie came out, Ubisoft had tried to step into, the film industry with Assassin's Creed Lineage, which consisted of 3 short films that altogether are about like 30-35 minutes long, and it follows Ezio's father, who is investigating the murder of the Duke of Milan, and it's all set in the 15th century. And I mean, it's not bad for a short film. It kind of feels like a very long commercial watching it, and I do have to say there's a lot of scenes where the lighting looks like really low budget, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But yeah, this was officially the first time Ubisoft tried to make Assassin's Creed into like a movie or film type of deal. And I mean, for their first attempt, it actually wasn't all that bad, so I gotta give that to them.
Okay, there are over 33 books in the Assassin's Creed book series. Like, who's reading all 33 books in the Assassin's Creed series? I am curious if anyone out there has, like, the perfect 100% record on that. All right, let's look at them all quickly and make sure we're not missing any really important ones that, like, Assassin's Creed fans definitely cannot risk missing out on. Okay, the first book was Assassin's Creed Renaissance. This one's pretty easy to follow. It's just the story of Assassin's Creed 2, except novelized, and it doesn't follow any of, like, the real world stuff. It just follows, like, the story of Ezio. Some of the dialogues change, some of the outcomes from the story aren't included, but it's mostly just a retelling of Assassin's Creed 2. The next one was Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, released in 2010, to also ride off the hype of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood releasing. This book was praised a bit for being closer to the novel itself, story-wise and dialogue-wise, though there are some events that happen in this book that didn't happen in the game, but generally is accepted as a more faithful adaptation of the Assassin's Creed game. Then a year later in 2011, The Secret Crusade released, and this one follows Altair again, and this book actually aims to cover a little bit more ground than maybe what you would expect. It covered some of the events of the first game, some of the events events of Assassin's Creed Bloodlines and some of Altair's sequences from what his character does do in Assassin's Creed Revelations. The book mostly is an attempt to cover Altair's overall life rather than just a retelling of all of these games. And what's interesting is we kind of have this like in-universe narrator at one point halfway through the book, which is kind of unique. And it turns out that the narrator of the book actually was Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, who was recovering and reading through another character's journal on his way to Constantinople during the events of Revelations. Okay, conceptually speaking, I think Assassin's Creed Forsaken is one of the more unique ones because this book was based on the main story of Assassin's Creed 3. But instead of being a direct adaptation, the book aims to tell the story of Haytham Kenway, who was the main antagonist of Assassin's Creed 3. So this book serves kind of as this mirrored image parallel to the main game, following the life and death of this character, and is kind of presented as his own journal, which is a unique way to make a story fleshed out. I think this one would be really good for anyone who played through Assassin's Creed 3 and just wanted more story, because getting to see this parallel that directly compares to the events and the pacing of the third game is what I think is kind of cool. Okay, but that's not even where the rest of this stops. There are so many other books. There's a novelization of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which is presented as like a journal of the main character, Edward Kenway. Then Assassin's Creed Unity had a book, but this one actually follows the perspective and journal of the character Elise. 2015 saw Assassin's Creed Underworld, which followed a character known as Jayadeep Mir, who's actually the son of the character that you played as in Assassin's Creed Chronicles India, and this one tied in more closely to Assassin's Creed Syndicate. But then in 2016, it was kind of a big year for Assassin's Creed. Something massive was coming. The first ever big budget live action Assassin's Creed movie. Oh boy, Luke watched this one. But of course, after the movie release, there had to be a book tie-in to the movie, which was just a novelization of the events that happened in the movie itself. There's also some like little short stories in there as well. Then there's Assassin's Creed Origins Desert Oath, which took place before the events of Assassin's Creed Origins. Assassin's Creed Odyssey had a book which was an official novelization of the story of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, except it's just like one of the possible story paths that you can have, which features Cassandra from the game. Then there's the Ming Storm series, which started in 2019, and it's like a trilogy of non-canon novels that follow the character from Assassin's Creed Chronicles China, Shao Jun. The story is loosely based on the events of Assassin's Creed Chronicles China, but then it like diverges and goes into like this different path. There's been 2 entries so far, and the third one is yet to release. Okay, then I haven't played too much of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, so excuse my pronunciations if they're way off here. But there's a tie-in novel for Assassin's Creed Valhalla called Gehrman's Saga, but this one doesn't actually follow the events of Valhalla like the other ones did for like Odyssey. It follows a Viking named Gehrmund Hellhide, and he tries to prove his worth to the great heathen army during the invasion of the British Isles. Yeah, I don't know much about this one. Then there was Assassin's Creed Valhalla Sword of the White Horse, and man, look at this like cover. This goes really, really hard. This one serves a little bit as a sequel to Valhalla, but it follows like this witch warrior who's like trying to get the Excalibur or something. And then 2023 saw 3 more releases. We're almost there. There was the Golden City, which was another tie-in to Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Assassin's Creed Mirage, bridging the gap between the 2 games. Then there's the World of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is actually a really cool hardcover illustrated book. This one was actually published by Dark Horse Comics, and it's kind of presented as like this in-universe journal that accounts for some of the events from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And then for the release of Assassin's Creed Mirage, there was Assassin's Creed Mirage, Daughter of No One, which was essentially a prequel to Assassin's Creed Mirage. Okay, those are the main books, but then there's a couple of other little book series that have also come up over times, like Assassin's Creed Last Descendants, which was a trilogy of young adult novels. These narratives are completely separated from the main Assassin's Creed games. They're kind of like their own stories, typically following like some teenage character instead. Kind of an interesting concept, I guess. There was another book called Assassin's Creed Heresy, which was a little bit different because this one was actually published by Ubisoft in the US, but it still had a regular release in the United Kingdom. It follows a character named Gabriel who fought alongside Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War. Then there was another trilogy that was made once again for like the young adult audience, which is known as the Fragment series. This one once again follows younger characters. They're a pair of siblings. They're assassins in the making, and then there's like different points of history represented. And then currently there's another trilogy in the works known as the Engine of History series that has 2 entries already released, the Magnus Conspiracy, the Resurrection Plot, and a 3rd book coming sometime soon. So far, these books have taken place in like the mid 1800s in like London, but there are some like African locales in it as well. Okay, then there's also a couple other comic or visual adaptations of Assassin's Creed that have come out over the years. There's one just called Assassin's Creed, which released by Titan Comics, and that was like from 2015 to 2016. There was a couple of different entries for that. And then there was also Assassin's Creed Brahmin, where it itself was published by Ubi Workshop, follows the story of Arbaz Mir.
Also, there was another adaptation with Xiao Jung, a short-lived manga series, which brought back this character in 2020, which was the first time we had seen the specific character since Chronicles China.
And that covers pretty much every book in the Assassin's Creed series, but then there's some weird stuff that we can talk about now. Last year, we saw the release of Assassin's Creed Nexus VR, which was a VR Assassin's Creed game that I didn't even know existed until I started doing research for this very video. Now, this thing released for the MetaQuest and actually had a pretty interesting premise, revisiting multiple characters that were kind of iconic fan favorites from throughout the series. Like Ezio shows up, I think Cassandra's in there, Connor's in there. I don't know, it's kind of like the Avengers of Assassin's Creed characters coming together for an ultimate experience that you can only play if you have a VR headset. Man, look at all of the different developer studios Ubisoft threw at this game to try to make it really good. Now, I'll be honest, I've never even worn a VR headset before, but apparently this game was surprisingly not the worst thing ever. I was fully expecting this game to actually just be like a glorified tech demo for what a VR Assassin's Creed could look like, but according to the reviews across the board, people were not only impressed to find that this was an actual full game, but also that Assassin's Creed translated into the VR formula in a pretty good way. Wow. Even some of the more critical reviews that are out there still praise the game for what it was able to accomplish and show that AAA developers can make a good VR action adventure game like this. Now, of course, there were some criticisms, like, you know, there was a couple of like bugs and glitches here and there and just like little jittery things like frame rates occasionally, which apparently makes gameplay on the VR a little bit more awkward sometimes. But outside of that, and maybe the story not intriguing some people, it seemed like actually a pretty good game. If I actually had a MetaQuest, I would buy this game, I think. I'd feel good about buying this game. Unfortunately, though, just recently during an investment meeting, the Ubisoft CEO said that the game had disappointing sales, which resulted in Ubisoft choosing not to increase its investment in VR anymore. It really doesn't surprise me that the game didn't sell that well. I feel like VR is still something that relies more on like indie studios to come up with creative things, and I don't think that there's enough of an install base of people who have VR headsets that could warrant like big AAA productions. And I think that's the hard thing with VR emerging as this new platform, because it's not just gaming, it's something completely different, and it kind of has to grow on its own organically. You can't just throw like a 2024 video game AAA budget at it expecting to do the same level of sales. It's its own thing. It still needs to grow and get its own player base first. And so I have a feeling that it's more probably Ubisoft shooting for the moon, thinking if they threw enough money at it, it would make a profit. I mean, once again, look at all these development studios that were signed on to work on it, but I'm kind of disappointed that they're not going to do more stuff with VR. I feel like if they had like a small core team working on stuff and they, you know, built out and used different resources available, maybe they could have done something more in the future. But I guess for now, this is just going to be like one of those little VR projects that started and then stopped. And that's a shame for VR overall, because it probably dissuades some of the other big game development studios to, you know, look into it. Okay, but what if I was to tell you there was a 4th Assassin's Creed Chronicles game? Kinda. There was a game called Assassin's Creed Unity Arno's Chronicles, which originally released for Huawei Honor smartphones, and it had a gameplay style similar to the Assassin's Creed Chronicle games, but roughly was based on the events of Assassin's Creed Unity. This one was kind of a weird one that not too many people even know much about, since we didn't really see it release here on the West. Matter of fact, there was a couple of other interesting handheld games that had very short lives that kind of never really caught on to the extent that maybe Ubisoft had hoped they would have. So let's just like look through these really quickly. There was a game called Assassin's Creed Multiplayer Rearmed, which was a multiplayer game designed for iOS and it was on like iPad and stuff. This game had you hunting specific targets and was like mapped into a real-time multiplayer mode with up to 4 players. You had to assassinate an assigned target without being hunted by the killer. Definitely an interesting concept for sure. There was another game called Assassin's Creed Recollection. This one put players head to head in essentially what was like a board game, but translated onto iOS. There was also like a full-on story campaign that you could play single player in this one, which is surprising for an older iOS game, but I mean, it was a board game. And you know what? Who needs Skull and Bones when Assassin's Creed Pirates existed for iOS and Android devices back in 2013? You're on a boat and you command a ship and crew, and there's some stuff that happens. The gameplay was mostly focused on real-time battles between ships, so that's kind of cool. But it was rendered in 3D, so that was, like a step in the right direction. Then there was Assassin's Creed Memories, and this was like a card battler, and the cards were like a part of this system where you would then battle targets, chase them around. I don't know, the regular strategy elements you'd expect from a card battler. It had multiplayer components as well, and you could do like guild stuff too. Interestingly enough, this one did have different historical eras represented, so at least I had that going for it. And then there was also another Assassin's Creed game called Assassin's Creed Rebellion, and this was a free-to-play strategy RPG which came out on Android and iPhone devices, and it took place during the Spanish Inquisition. There was actually quite a few new characters introduced for this one, but there was also some like returning characters that were popular. So I guess that's kind of cool. But yeah, all of these Assassin's Creed mobile games never really caught on to the extent of what I maybe thought that Ubisoft would want to see, like something, bigger, but they tried. There were a few other Assassin's Creed projects that are often forgot about, like Assassin's Creed Project Legacy, which was technically a browser-based RPG Assassin's Creed game that was on the Facebook application, and it was a tie-in with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. It was mostly text-based, it was put on hold in 2011, and then it was completely removed by Facebook in 2013. There also was another Assassin's Creed game known as Utopia, which would have taken place prior to the events of Assassin's Creed 3, and it would have been kind of unique in its own gameplay, separate from what the regular gameplay you would expect from an Assassin's Creed game, except this one would have taken place in the 17th century during the colonization of North America. It would have also had some sort of multiplayer versus mode, like 3D fighting or something like that, but this was also scrapped and canceled altogether. There also was a platforming browser game called Assassin's Creed Freerunners that keeps the same like art style from Assassin's Creed Rebellion. This is interesting, I guess. And then there's one more game that's actually coming out on mobile devices in the future known as Assassin's Creed Jade. This game is supposed to take place in ancient China around 3rd century BC, and will have players get to make their own character finally, which is fantastic. Now this gameplay will be more in line with what we would see in a main Assassin's Creed release, so it's going to be interesting to see how they pull off doing a mobile game in the more modern times now. Maybe it'll actually be good, maybe it'll be garbage. We'll just have to wait and find out. But then, for a little while after the release of Assassin's Creed 3, Assassin's Creed started doing like large DLC packs that sometimes would be smaller DLCs that would then be combined to make up a larger pack, and sometimes they would be even standalone DLCs. It's a little confusing, but with Assassin's Creed 3, they released The Tyranny of King Washington, and I'm gonna send this over to Luke. Luke, just look at this box art. Like, doesn't this look incredible?
Yo, this box art looks crazy, dude. I'm not gonna lie.
It goes pretty hard. So this is an interesting DLC expansion. I don't think a lot of people actually got to see this image. It was kind of like a little side story quest that followed like this what if scenario where George Washington goes mad with power, and there's like this like apple that has these like weird traits that show this like twisted world that George Washington would have created. Like, George Washington's not a bad guy in the story or anything, but like it's a different reality, right, where he is a bad guy, and Connor has to go and like face that, and essentially George Washington becomes the Mad King of the United States. There's like other historical characters that show up, like Benjamin Franklin, because why not? There's like a resistance group led by Samuel Adams. I don't know, there's like stuff going on that relates everything together, and it's like tied to this like side history.
This kind of makes it seem like it's the MCU, but with like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin,
Could you imagine the Avengers Assassin's Creed tie-in where like all of the American forefathers come together to fight in a war? Like all the presidents come together.
Dude, I feel like actually these types of concepts happen a lot. Remember Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter?
Oh, I remember that. And that was popular for multiple reasons.
I kind of liked it when I was a kid. Yeah.
I think it was popular because like the vampire thing was in, and this is almost like a parody of that.
Right, yeah. It was very out there, and I mean, so I feel this one is kind of out there too, and that's why I think this actually looks very interesting, you know what I mean?
I love the idea of it. It didn't do very well review-wise, surprisingly. I mean, it didn't do terrible, it was like 7 out of 10, but I think the problem was they released them in like 3 chapters, so you kind of would sit down, play it, and then they would end, and then you'd have to wait for the next release. Sit down, play it, end, and then wait for the next release, sit down, play it, and then it would end. Later on, it would be just released as its own, like, bundle together, and now I think if you buy, like, the remastered edition of Assassin's Creed 3, it just is included as part of the game. So, it kind of got delegated to stopping its own story, but just as like a side quest. But I don't think as many people experienced this one who played Assassin's Creed 3 just because it was paywalled at the beginning.
Also, I looked up how long the DLC is, and it's like 5 hours if you do the full thing. So like each part was like a little over an hour, right? Like an hour and a half.
Yeah, I can see that being not received as well.
You play the first one, you play an hour and a half, and you're like, that's it?
Yeah, then you have to buy the next one.
Yeah.
It might have been part of a season pass. I don't remember how they released it. Then Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, right? That was a very well-received Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah, I mean, the legacy of Black Flag is living on today. We're getting Skull and Bones, right? That's kind of...
Oh, no. We'll talk about Skull and Bones in this video, actually. We might as well, because...
Okay.
It is, in a way...
I mean, it is, yeah. It's
an Assassin's Creed game at this
yeah.
point. Or started as one. Okay, so... There was a game called Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, which was the DLC equivalent of what we just talked about with the George Washington stuff. But this time around, they actually released it fully standalone. So you could play the DLC without having Black Flag. And that's really interesting because that now essentially makes it its own title in itself. It was interesting. It was like the story during like the 1700s. It followed the same character, I think, from Black Flag. The main plot was like running around disrupting slave trade. So... I feel like that's like an interesting like quest line.
It's pretty based.
Yeah, I mean, go for it. This one actually was reviewed a little bit better than The Tyranny of George Washington. Not by a whole lot, but still, people seem to generally like it.
Okay, maybe I'm completely wrong here, but wasn't Assassin's Creed 3 like generally not that well received back in the day? Like I felt like there was a lot of people who didn't like it. Like they liked 1 and 2 a lot, and then 3 they didn't.
I remember that too. I think it was more maybe the sentiment around the Assassin's Creed community where like there's more just people who don't like a new entry. Assassin's Creed 2 was so well loved, right?
Yeah.
Like people just loved that game. I think in response to Assassin's Creed 3, maybe like the more hardcore fan base didn't like it, but I think like critically speaking it still did relatively well. A lot of like 8 and 9 out of 10s out there. So it is kind of interesting to compare that and see how things like these standalone DLCs like compare to like a main release.
And then I just felt like by Black Flag that shifted again, and people really liked Black Flag.
Black Flag was hyped because of like the naval combat was like a really cool aspect of it.
Yeah, I feel like there's Assassin's Creed fans who are only Black Flag fans, if that makes sense.
Right, which we might as well talk about it, right? So Assassin's Creed Black Flag was originally going to it originally inspired, right, like some sort of new project. They wanted to do something that like capitalized on that popular, I guess, game mechanic of like the naval warfare. They originally were going to do like a DLC for later Assassin's Creed games, and then that like spun out, and all of a sudden they went all in, like 5 or 6 years ago? Longer than that? 7 years ago? With the announcement of Skull and Bones, which was essentially an entire standalone IP based on the ship mechanics of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Obviously things would be expanded on and the vision was different, but it was very clear. It was Ubisoft. They were taking something that was very popular with Assassin's Creed and trying to make it its own thing. And man, that game's coming out and I could not be less excited about it. I am so down at the bottom of the barrel with excitement. I just, it looks very boring.
Yeah, it's looking very rough, and I mean, we've talked about this in another video, so if you guys want to see our development hell video, we talk a little more about it. But this game has been stuck in development hell for a long time, and this was one of those projects I think would have been cancelled if they didn't have certain contracts with certain governments.
Those like tax breaks and stuff, right?
Got tax breaks in Singapore, and then they got like, in return, they employed people, right, which is good for the economy there. But like, they had to finish this game, and I don't know. I don't know if that's a good way to create art.
It just, the game keeps getting delayed over and over again. Ubisoft doesn't necessarily have the most amazing track record.
They make very mediocre games 99% of the time.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this, but the recent trailer they just dropped for Skull and Bones has this like monologue about capitalism and like how evil it is. And it feels so ironic in like with the state of like what the gaming industry, like the state of the gaming industry right now, right? Like just how there's like all this stuff about like toxic workplace environments and like game crunch and all these things. Like this little like trailer, it feels almost self-aware, but then not at all. Like it's like commentating exactly on like what is affecting the gaming industry. It's not about the gaming industry. They're trying to get people excited for Skull and Bones, but It's a weird watch. If you guys haven't seen it, if you want to watch something like kind of on the nose, check it out and then let me know what you think about it in the comments here. I'll look for comments here about that trailer exactly. Cause I just thought it was like funny. Like I almost chuckled watching it.
Also, you gotta think when they like first started this project, like I don't know, when did Plague Flight come out? 2013, 2014? I think.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah, 2013.
Like there wasn't any competition in the pirate game space, right? But like now you get Sea of Thieves, and this just looks like, I'm not a big Sea of Thieves fan. You know, I've had my issues with Sea of Thieves.
Right.
But this looks 10 million times more awful than Sea of Thieves, right?
I don't like the fact you can't walk around as a character. Like you are the boat.
Yeah, you can't get off your boat when you want. You can only do PvP when someone has a contract or something.
And I get the game's trying to do something different than Sea of Thieves. It's not trying to copy the Sea of Thieves formula, but there's going to be like a large amount of people who are going to compare it to like Sea of Thieves, because it's not the gameplay genre I think that people are buying the game for. They're buying the game for the setting. People want more pirate game adventures, and they are going to compare pirate games against each other. It's the same thing that happened with Starfield, right? Like people immediately looked at Starfield and were drawing comparisons to like No Man's Sky. I mean, not everyone did, but a lot of people drew comparisons to No Man's Sky, because while a lot of people bought the game because they wanted a Bethesda RPG, there was this big appeal for like a space exploration game, and people just wanted to know like what game provides more like space exploration content, right? And that's where those comparisons were drawn from. I think the same exact thing happened with Black Flag, and then when we see Sea of Thieves comes out and the spin-off of Black Flag, right? It's just which game gives you the better pirate experience? It's gonna be Sea of Thieves probably. Okay, so after Freedom Cry released, right? Then there was Assassin's Creed Rogue and Assassin's Creed Unity. I don't know what happened during development where neither of these games really had like the same level of like a standalone DLC, but I think because they were doing that whole like 2 games on the different generations, that's probably why like we didn't see like a standalone DLC.
I mean, Unity was unfinished, right? So there definitely was development issues, like a ton, yeah.
But by Syndicate, the next game, there was the return of like these larger DLC projects. And this one did something really interesting. They did this whole narrative on Jack the Ripper, which you know like how popular that is as like a historical figure. Like so like putting a narrative around that where you have to identify like this type of stuff and explore all of this within the Assassin's Creed universe. Really cool concept, I think.
Why do these DLC sound better than the games? Like, what's going on?
That's what I want to know. You know, Far Cry does the same exact thing, I feel like. Far Cry is also a Ubisoft game, but like, they'll like, you know, hype up this like really serious game and, you know, you can take it or leave it. I feel like Far Cry 6 did that. And then like, if you come back to Far Cry 6 and look at like the DLCs that released, I'm like, where was this in the game? This sounds so much fun. I think Far Cry 5 even did that. And it just, like, I mean, the core games are okay, sometimes repetitive maybe, but like, they just go all out. Far Cry 3 had Blood Dragon, which was amazing. I don't know why, like, they don't just, like, double down and do, like, a full game on some of their spin-off ideas. Okay, and then after this DLC released, we go into like the newer era, like with the Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla. There wasn't really the standalone DLC anymore, but there still was a lot of attention put to DLC. The last one that really stands out is probably Assassin's Creed Odyssey Legacy of the First Blade, which was like a continued on story from the main Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
But then again, the Legacy of the First Blade, that sounds so generic. That's not as exciting as the other ones.
It does, but it did have a really cool box art, so...
Oh, I mean,
you gotta give it that. You gotta give it the
That's
cover.
half the
It's
deal.
half the battle. It was released once again as episodes, which I'm not a fan of. If they're just gonna do short episodes released over like a 3-month window, just release it as a single DLC expansion. I mean, it was okay. It seemed like people really liked this at first. There was like some controversy about like a forced romantic storyline or something.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember reading that on Twitter, yeah.
And then that was interesting enough that it was criticized. But then Ubisoft even went as far as updating the story and like changing out some dialogue lines to avoid forcing players into a romantic situation in the character story. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Not something that typically is done where like there's complaints about the story and developers come and change the story because of the complaints. And then after that with Valhalla and I guess with what they're probably going to do with Mirage. They kind of switched away from the DLC standalone type experiences and instead are doing episodic content released within the base game. Valhalla had a lot of content. I think there was like, Valhalla ended up being so long with all the content that they added, besides the base game being very long already, for better or worse.
But there was one DLC. Didn't Valhalla have the one DLC like the Siege of Paris?
Oh yeah, that one always sounded really cool. Like I wanted to try that one.
Yeah, that one sounded super cool. There's like actually, I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Vikings, but there's like an arc where they also do a siege on Paris, and that was so cool that I'd love to play it in video game form.
And then there was something weird with Assassin's Creed Valhalla where like they had some DLC included in like the season pass, but then other DLC that you had to buy separately. And I was always really annoyed whenever I was trying to buy that game that like one of them was on sale, but the other one with everything I needed wasn't on sale or something. And it drove me insane to like, I don't even remember what I ended up doing. I think I bought the game and then played it for 10 minutes and then never got back to it.
But I think all the DLC for Valhalla, if I'm doing like the math right, real quick, right? It sounds like it's 50 hours of content just on the DLC stuff.
Wow, that is a lot though.
That is a lot, yeah.
There's so much Assassin's Creed content, it's overwhelming, dude. Like, this was insane going through all this.
I never really realized until we did this video how much Ubisoft milks Assassin's Creed.
One thing that's interesting, I didn't know about this until our research. Assassin's Creed is inspired by a book called Alamut, I think, written by Vladimir Bartol. And it was published in 1938, but only published in English in 2004.
Where was it originally published? Like, where's this Vladimir Boltov from?
Maybe Slovenia? Or Kingdom of Yugoslavia.
Okay.
But in Slovene. Probably, what would that be, like, Free Soviet Union publications in 1938? Dude, my world history of countries and borders, like, before World War II is a little...
There's a lot that, you know, changed over the years.
Right. Kingdom of Yugoslavia, I assume, got absorbed into the Soviet Union, right?
Probably. But then today we have Czechoslovakia, right? Which is like two countries? Or is it not anymore? I don't know, dude.
Wait, but we're talking about the Kingdom of Yugoslavia.
Oh, wait, I'm lost.
It's not
I'm
even the right
completely
country.
lost, dude.
Did the Kingdom of Yugoslavia become a part of the Soviet Union? No, they didn't.
Good for them.
It was a separate entity that emerged after World War I.
It says it formed out of Austria-Hungary, too.
Oh, is that where it came from? After... Dude, the whole Austria-Hungary thing's so interesting to me. Like, reading up on, like, World War I history. Like, this country that existed for, like, hundreds and hundreds and, like, hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, right? Like, of, like, a leadership, right? Like, is just gone. Like, there is no... Wait, that's not Austria-Hungary. Wait, is that Austria-Hungary? The Ottoman Empire.
Oh, the Ottoman Empire is also gone, yeah.
Dude, I'm so lost with history.
Maybe we should do start another channel where we talk about geography. We're not allowed to Google anything. We just have to figure it out. We get a
just
world
gotta
map.
try to
Each of us gets a
remember.
world map on the wall. And that's it. That's the information we have.
Well, this was embarrassing, us trying to figure out geographic history from pre-World War II. If anyone wants to let us know in the comments what we're wrong about, I appreciate it.
Educate us, yeah.
Please educate us. We know, if there's knowledge in there. If we think about it hard enough and long enough, we probably can start to figure stuff out. We're not as lost as we think. Or maybe we are more lost than we think we are.
Maybe we are. It's also 2 a.m. And, you know,
It is 2 a.m. Yeah.
maybe not prime geography lesson hours.
Huge thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. We really appreciate it. Make sure you guys check out the link down below. Also, huge shout out to our patrons. Y'all are awesome. If you guys want to support our channel, throw a few bucks our way. You can help our channel continue to make content like this. The Patreon pretty much is the reason that we get to do the little podcast type section at the end where we just talk about stuff, have a good time, figure out geography. So we appreciate you guys. And if you're not subscribed, that's like the first step to just helping support our channel. A subscription goes a long way. We've gotten a ton of new subscribers in the last couple of months. So like, even if you're a newer subscriber, we see you, we appreciate you. You're helping bring this channel into the future, in the new era. So we're happy to have you guys on board.
What do we call this new era?
The geography era. Maybe
Oh,
not.
no, wait a minute. That's not yet.
Do the underscore, the under.
The lowercase?
lowercase. The lower.
You doesn't even know what we're doing.
Okay, fourth channel. Rocket Sloth vocabulary.
Dude, I need it, actually.
Oh my goodness,
Dude,
this has
it's-
been rough. You know what? I don't know. Just leave it in.
Yeah, I mean, if everything fails, we always know we can produce educational shows.
Dude, we were doing so good with the podcast section. I felt like we were like keeping it informative. We weren't getting off track, and then it just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at least it fell apart at the end. So if people want to watch
Yeah,
this long, I appreciate it. Us goofing around a little
appreciate
bit.
Yeah. So okay, cool. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you guys next week with something else.
Bye bye.
Bye.